The first real impact of the law on Pi and on me came in 1978 when there were raids on the executive committee. And these followed tabloid publicity. They very closely followed exposure of our activities, which, by the way, were already public and exposed. But that didn't stop the News of the World doing an expose as though we were secret. But they brought into the open particular people and photographed particular people. So they were playing the man, not the ball, so to speak, in a very, very big way indeed. As a result of the pressure, they promised their readers that they would get us, basically, put it simply. And as a result of their flash coverage, they more or less invited the Director of Prosecutions to do something. It was, they were saying, well, we've shown you what these people are up to, now do something. I understand that it was that Sir Ian Percival, who was the Solicitor General at that time, put pressure on the DPP to do something. And we were raided, and the year after that, we were charged, a number of us, with conspiracy to corrupt public morals. Now, this came to trial in 1980 to 81. There were 2 trials, actually. The first, there was a hung jury. A couple of people were acquitted, and 4 of them were acquitted out of the 5 who were on trial. And so I was the only person left in the dock for the retrial. So we'd now got the interesting situation of conspiracy to corrupt public morals, but I was the only conspirator. Now, how you can have a conspiracy of one person is beyond me. The jury on that occasion decided that I was guilty and that I alone went to prison for 2 years following that act. Pi was not declared illegal. Pi continued in being and was never ever a proscribed organisation like the IRA, for instance, which had its legal Sinn Féin political wing. Well, Pi was always about being part of the democratic process and was never made illegal. There was another trial 2 or 3 years down the road in which the new committee members were got on incitement charges, I believe it was, which were also somewhat spurious in my view, and it was a largely prejudiced case that was brought against us of a political nature. When I say us, I wasn't in the dock on that occasion, but my successors were. Yes, I didn't expect to go to prison because I had the naive expectation that justice would win. Because I felt I was not guilty, I very naively supposed I would be found not guilty. Well, that didn't happen, and so I was accordingly utterly devastated to find myself suddenly whisked off to jail for a couple of years. I found that extremely hard because in those days it was brutal. Well, I was attacked physically on a number of occasions in prison, and I just had to fend for myself as best I could. I'm not a violent person, I'm not used to fighting. But I had to defend myself. I mean, the first time I was got at, it was impossible to defend myself really, though, on that occasion, because I was walking up an iron staircase. This was like something out of a Hollywood film, because I was carrying my meal tray, as you did, from where you got the meal up to your cell, and I was carrying it on a tray. And you probably have seen the inside of our Victorian jails. This was in Wormwood Scrubs, actually. I was going up the iron staircase to the upper landing, and I just got to the top, and then suddenly there was a fist out of nowhere. Wham! Straight in my face. My tray went one way, and I sort of bowled over backwards, and I went tumbling down to the bottom of this big iron staircase. I was amazed to find at the bottom that I hadn't got any bones broken or anything. I was more or less in one piece. But there was a couple of other incidents, and one where I had to defend myself, where the guy started pummeling me, and I just had to start hitting back to keep this guy off. And there were whistles blowing and officers coming in from both sides and pulling us apart. And I was charged with an offence under prison discipline. I was charged with fighting. And I was convicted of fighting as well. And I've forgotten the punishment now, but it wasn't very funny. The worst thing I found was having to share a cell with people who were completely different in their way of thinking and, basically criminals of an ordinary criminal mindset, and very, very difficult to get along with. Which is not to say I didn't find friends in prison. There were some people there who were fine. In any situation you find there are worse people and better people amongst the officers as well. But in those days, the officers would actually encourage, more or less, by a nod and a wink, that people would have a go at the nonces, at people with sexuality like mine. It has got better, although it's still sheer hell spending 23 hours a day in a cell with somebody you don't like, or even somebody you do like. It's just bad for anybody in prison, frankly. It's even worse for paedophiles, but you don't have any alternative. It's not as though you can say, oh, well, I've had enough of this, I'm going home. So you can't go anywhere. You just have to get through it, don't you? So that's the way it was. Any murder of a child is a terrible, terrible thing. And I would wish to dissociate myself from violence of any kind, never mind a particularly brutal and horrible thing like that. Obviously, one has to have total empathy for the destroyed lives that brings surrounding it, the parents and anybody who's associated with that child. Sarah Payne, absolutely, absolutely devastating and awful. However, from my point of view, I am totally separated from that by the fact that I have feelings which are not like that. I don't feel violent towards children. I've never expressed violence towards children, and I abhor it when it happens. One reason is to abhor it just because it's an evil and terrible thing. Another, looking at it more selfishly, is because whenever that happens, people like me get the blame for it. Roy Whiting was said to be a paedophile, which to me he wasn't, because a paedophile, looking back to the origins of that word, is somebody who loves children. Now, when somebody murders them, it's a funny sort of love, isn't it? So I wouldn't call that man a paedophile. We've been robbed of the best of that word by it being associated with basically evil bastards like that. But having said that, I would say, look, I'm not an expert on this. I don't know about people I would call psychopaths. I think that's the word, or murderer, not paedophile. And there are some people who will do anything for whatever reason in their own background, and they would have to explain or justify themselves if they wanted to, and I don't hear any of them doing so. But if they wanted to, say, well, look, I had a very bad childhood or something like that, well, fine, one might find reasons why they'd behaved as they did. But I wouldn't know those reasons because I haven't had that kind of life experience that these people have had. I don't have the kind of feelings that they have. All I know is the impact that their behaviour has on their victims and on the wider society, and the way it poisons the well of sexuality and intimacy, and it takes away all thoughts of love and the good things. We heard for something like a decade or more, and it's still in the public consciousness, about the murder of Sarah Payne, which happened around about the year 2000 or perhaps a little before. What are we now? 15 years later, pretty much. And we're still talking about one murder. Why? Because it's a matter of extreme rarity that there is this kind of murder. There are thousands, tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of pedophiles, according to the research. Not many of them end up as murderers, very, very few. Let's put this in the context of statistics, not very appealing statistics, but they are important. Every fortnight, on average, in this country, every 10 days, actually, a parent murders a child. How many of those do we hear about in the media? These, in various circumstances, they may or may not have sexual aspects to them, but as a result of people being very violent and dysfunctional and not very good parents, and as a result of broken marriages where one partner takes revenge on another by killing the children, awful, awful things happen, and they're passed over in a paragraph or less in the newspapers. And yet one murder that has a sexual connotation, like the killing of Sarah Payne, we hear about for a decade or more. Do you know, I remember one case, I think it was from Gloucestershire, 10 or 20 years ago, where a father decapitated 3 of his children and stuck their heads on the railing in order to spite his wife, his ex-wife. And that was passed over in a day or two in the media. Nobody can remember it now, but it happened. Awful, awful things. We don't talk about, men must not get married to women. They must not have sexual relationships because of the danger that they might eventually murder their children. That would be absurd. And it's absurd to judge paedophilia in the same way.